Hey there, friends. David Paulides, CanAm Missing Project, copyrighted edition for our video channel. Thanks for being here. And this is a missing person segment. And we're going to cover a couple of cases that are fascinating. And right before we get into that, I want to say something about the world we live in. A long time ago, a friend told me, much older friend, said, Dave, very easy to make friends, very hard to keep friends. Within the last couple of years, people I've done huge favors for, huge favors, decided, I guess, I couldn't help them anymore, so they decided to not help me at a time where I needed some help. It's a sobering moment when that occurs, when you don't expect it from somebody. I don't want to be jaded, and I don't want them to dictate the path I take in life towards my other friends. But I found it appalling. And I think we all encompass this in life, and one of the most amazing dynamics is the human dynamic. How we relate to one another, how we get along, how we can find somebody to live with and spend our time with. It's fascinating to me. It's fascinating. Now, I don't like reading articles, but when people send me one that's interesting, I'm going to read it to you, especially since it kind of deals with things I'm interested in. I've told you many times that I've spent a lot of time in the Yukon Territory. And half of it was for business and half of it was for pleasure. It's one of the most beautiful places on the planet. And it's one of the most remote. Well, Brian sent me this. And it comes from a magazine called whatsupyukon.com, May 22nd, 2024. It says, the title of it is called The Silver Heart Road Watcher. It says, former resident of the Yukon contacted me by email in October 2020 to share a couple of encounters with a Sasquatch. First one took place in 95, the second one in 97, both along the same road. At the time, the gentleman worked at the Old Swift River Lodge, located along the Alaska Highway at historic mile 733. On his days off, he would venture out and explore the nearby countryside, driving his ATV along trails and side roads. Before I go on, there was just an article within the last week about a woman that was running along a road in the Yukon and was attacked by a grizzly bear. Her German Shepherd saved her. Yeah, it can be dangerous in the Yukon. On September 25th, 95, which he remembers well, as it was his 25th birthday, he was driving along the Silver Heart Road, just east of the Alaska Highway, Continental Divide at kilometer 1120. Close to the north end of Edgar Lake, some 40 kilometers along the road, he had stopped to look around, and as he was doing so, heard a loud snap coming from the nearby forest. It sounded like a large branch being broken off, he told me. Now, focusing on the source of the noise, he observed a tall and large hair-covered creature, which he judged to be 210 centimeters tall, in the process of crouching down in an attempt to hide among the trees. This creature was only 30 meters or so away from the road where he had stopped on his ATV. And he seemed to focus on him as well. They were basically looking at each other. The encounter lasted for a couple of minutes. The witness said, explaining that the creature stood about at least 190 centimeters and weighed about 110 kilograms. Then he said the creature had to be actually at least 275 kilograms, just humongous. I got scared, big time. I did not have any weapons, so I just peeled out of there. On his way back to the lodge, it dawned on him, and he said, quote, I just saw a Sasquatch. He did not say anything to anyone as he was scared of being ridiculed. In September of 97, he experienced a second sighting, again on the Silver Heart mine access road. This time he was out moose hunting and had a rifle with him. He had driven as far as the mine site, not seeing any moose, and was on the way back to the lodge. He drove slowly and stopped frequently to look around. In an area close to Daphne Lake, which empties into the Rancheria River, he noticed an upside-down tree, a pine tree firmly planted in the ground, sticking some 3 meters above the ground with its root system in the air. I have also seen these in Alaska. There's a lot of rumors surrounding them. I've heard of these inverted trees in Alaska, that's right, but not in the Yukon. Some Sasquatch researchers have mentioned that Sasquatch would plant these inverted trees as a sign. However, they have never shown anything that could prove it, and I personally still have my doubts. Farther on the east side of the road, by a swampy ground area, he noticed movements around 100 meters or so on his left and across the road. This was taking place about kilometer 11 of the Silver Heart Road. As he explained to me, he observed a large entity moving about. He knew right away that it was a Sasquatch. The creature was tall, about 200 centimeters, he said, and covered with dark brown hair. He could not make out details of the face, however, but mentioned that he thought it was a female because it was smaller than the creature he had observed a couple of years earlier. Even though he could not see any breasts, when I asked him what he figured its weight would be, he said the Sasquatch probably weighed in the neighborhood of 200 kilograms. When queried about the actions of the Sasquatch, he mentioned that at first it did not move. Then, after about a minute, it began slowly moving closer to a bunch of trees to its right and eventually moved away. During that time, the witness stayed with his ATV and watched the actions. I asked him why he did not shoot it, since he had a rifle with him. He said the Sasquatch looked too much like a human being. He looked just like us. Well, doesn't that fit? Anyhow, I know some of you don't like letters, but I hope you like the articles I pick out, because some of them are really good. Now, the 2 cases today. First one is out of Princeton, British Columbia. Now, Princeton is east of Vancouver. Part of it is in the middle of nowhere. And this individual went missing October 8th, 1955, 40 years old. His name was John Ewing. He was hiking an area south of Princeton. In 1947, the Ewings came from Scotland to Canada. They were living in Toronto, and he was in the RCAF. He practiced law in Toronto afterwards. He was known as an expert mountaineer. He lived in Princeton with his wife, and he loved to hike the Alps with his wife. He was considered an expert mountaineer. Well, on that day, he went to the Hope-Princeton Highway to drive and hike the Princeton Trail. He left home on October 7th, saying he'd be home that night. The idea was to hike the trail for 6-7 miles and then bushwhack across and cut what would have been a normal 20-mile hike down to a more reasonable amount. He had hiked this area many times in his past. He was in expert condition. Well, he didn't come home on the 7th. On October 8th, Mrs. Ewing reported her missing to the RCMP. And late that afternoon, the RCMP got on the trail and started searching. They were told that he had 2 chocolate bars and matches. And at about the time they were getting on the trail, it started to snow really hard. And by the next morning, the snow got up to waist deep. That's deep. Now, let me show you where this place is. This is Princeton, BC. This is the Princeton Hope Highway. And he was in this area right here. This is very, very wild out here. Very wild. And this is a picture of Mr. Ewing, a very well-known attorney in Princeton. Very, very smart man in great condition. October 9th, 10 searchers were covering a large area, and they had brought in 2 bloodhounds, 30 civilians, and they were at the 5,000-foot elevation. They also had 2 RCMP planes in the sky looking. So they were covering the ground and the air. They told Mrs. Ewing that they could probably keep the planes up for one day and then they'd have to cancel. So the next day, Mrs. Ewing went out on her own and hired a private helicopter, Okanagan Helicopters, to search. Mr. Ewing said that he estimated, before he left, he told his wife it'd be about a 15-mile hike. And his wife said, if anything, just be careful. Just be careful. He had done different segments in the past. You know, it was doable. This is the part that kind of blew me away. He had hiked in the Alps with his wife. He was considered an expert mountaineer. But he was wearing Oxford shoes and light dressing when he went out. Anybody who's been in the mountains, those would not be the shoes to wear. Well, on October 11th, the search on the ground continued. They were searching 20 square miles, which is a huge amount of space. The RCMP blocked those. They would be called grid searches now, into 11 areas. They had 6 expert RCAF ground searchers that had arrived that day. They were experts in tracking, experts in looking at the terrain and knowing what had been disturbed and what hadn't. These guys knew. I think that's Huck out there, our executive producer. She might be mad that I left her out. Let me see. Let me see if she's willing to come in. Hey, you want to come in? Come in. You want to come in? Oh, she's going to make her appearance. Come on in. Yeah? What's that all about? What's that all about? What? Come on. Come on. What are you all fired up about? Hey. What are you all fired up about? Huh? What are you woofing about? What are you woofing about? What are you woofing about? You just come in from outside? Was it raining out there? Oh, well, you're a little wet. Yeah. Yeah, you're a good girl. Okay? Yeah, you're a good girl. Okay. Well, Huck is on scene, so I better really start minding my manners and getting things right here. Hey, come on. So, ground search continues. They have their expert trackers, and they bring in 2 tracking dogs on top of the bloodhounds they had earlier. October 12th, Mrs. Ewing said that she was interviewed by the press, said that she sits by the phone all day, every day, anxiously waiting for something good to happen. She was quite nervous, to say the least. October 13th through the 16th, search and rescue continued, and weather complicated the searches many times because it was raining, it was snowing, it was windy, it was foggy. They had all kinds of things going on. But by now they had 4 dogs on the trail for multiple days, and they hadn't picked up anything. And then on October 17th, search and rescue was termed for weather. Mrs. Ewing got mad. Understood pulling people off when the weather got bad, but totally terminating the search, she wasn't happy. And a lot of friends weren't happy as well. And then on October 18th, 2 different hunters came forward stating that they spoke to John the day he vanished. Said that during the conversation he had told him that he was just on a one-day hike, he'd be off the trail soon. They confirmed what he was wearing. And this gave the searchers some renewed hope. So they put RCMP and some volunteers back onto the trail the next day. They searched for the 19th, the 20th, all day on the 21st, and it was terminated again. On October 31st, Mrs. Ewing took out a notice in the paper publicly thanking all of the volunteer searchers, the Army that searched for part of the time, the RCAF, game wardens, rangers, and the pilots that volunteered their time. This was a huge effort, folks. In a time where weather is unpredictable in the mountains during hunting season, September, October. It's always unpredictable. That's why you always check the weather before you go out. Always. You always tell people where you're going, like John did to his wife. Unfortunately, John was never found. Now today, if it happened, I would say you need to carry a personal locator beacon. Many of the Apple phones sold today have that ability in them. Now, if you don't have an Apple phone, I know that there's other phones out there that have them as well, but if you don't want to carry your phone, then they have personal locator beacons. Just search that on Amazon. All of them work just the same. You don't need to pay a monthly fee like some of them charge. Find one. Always carry them, especially if you're by yourself, and especially if you're going off trail. December 7th, 1955. Yeah. Not that long afterwards, there was a court ruling in Princeton that John Ewing was to be presumed deceased, with Mrs. Ewing being the heir. Now, in most states, it's a 3 to 5 year wait before someone can be presumed deceased, or actually declared deceased, so that the family can take over the bills, sell the house, etc. It's a big deal, and Mrs. Ewing got that. So, even though this was during hunting season, he was never found, dogs never picked up a scent. And he was a very successful attorney in Princeton. I know a lot of you wish a lot of attorneys would disappear, but there is a place in my heart for good attorneys. Second case involves an area I know very well. And it's an area where many people have disappeared, and we'll talk about this. This is in the state of Washington. In the book Missing 411 Washington, my latest release, this case is not in there. We just recently found it. The man's name was Walter Miller, 35 years old. He went missing August 23rd, 1931. He went missing at Snoqualmie Pass, Washington. That would have been east of Seattle in the mountains. And it's a cluster zone. If you have the Washington book and you look up Snoqualmie Pass east of Seattle, you'll see there's 2 cases there. This makes number 3. The 2 cases that are on the map, well, first one involves a young man, 37 years old. Miller was 35. This other man was 37, went missing September 27th, 2020. Brandon Nippon worked for a commercial insurance company, graduate of the University of Arizona, took his dog for a hike on Snoqualmie Pass, never came back. And the dog was never found. Remember what I've told you before. A lot of the disappearances that I chronicle involve disappearances of people that are with their dogs. Strange, I know. Second case involves a man named Gregory Brown, 49 years old. Went missing July 5th, 2005. He parked his vehicle near Rachel Lake, was in good health, not suicidal per the sheriff. They searched, never found anything. So here is Snoqualmie Pass, right here. Seattle's this way. This is high up in elevation. This is a beautiful area with a lot of granite and a lot of water out here. If you look up close, you can see all the little creeks, rivers, streams that are on the map. There's a lot going on here. Now, Walter Miller was a college graduate. He was an architect. Smart, super smart. His brother Ralph lived in Oklahoma City, and his sister lived in California. He came from Portland and moved to Seattle on August 8th. He hadn't been here that long. Only been here about 15 days. Well, he made friends quickly, and he liked the outdoors, loved to hike. So on August 23rd, he went with 16 others, and they were going to go climb a peak. And they all drove up to Snoqualmie Pass. They all set up their tents, got their sleeping bags ready, and they were going to hike to a place called Red Mountain. Here's Snoqualmie Pass. Here's Red Mountain right here. So they're going to take this hike through the valley and then up over the top of the mountain. Not a real excessively tough hike. Well, especially with 16 other people, everyone supports each other. Well, as they were on their hike, they were within 3 miles, and Walter started to feel not right, kind of tired, just not right. And he told them he was going to return to camp. Well, everyone said, yeah, it's fine. It was a pretty understandable path going back, pretty well established right along a river, no big deal. Well, again, he was within 3 miles of the summit. Well, later on that day, at about 4 o'clock, people start returning from their trek. And they come back to camp, and they see that nothing of Walter's is disturbed. His tent is set up, but food hasn't been touched. Nobody slept in his sleeping bag. It's obvious he hadn't arrived back to camp. So they thought, well, maybe he took a different route. They weren't super concerned. Until the next morning, when they woke up and he still had not returned. So the group notified the U.S. Forest Service and declared Walter missing. They got everybody they could looking for their friend on the trail. And they searched with homemade torches late into that first night on the 24th. In the meantime, the Forest Service was calling for more assistance. They knew that this could be a long search, and they were trying to prepare for it. Well, on the 25th, they got a large posse to respond. And the Forest Service organized a grid search starting at the trail where their camp was located and pushing outwards. They knew the last place they saw him, but they thought that he might have made it back that far, so they were going to start near the camp. On the 26th, they brought in professional trackers from the Forest Service, and these were outstanding trackers, not good, outstanding. They knew exactly what they were looking for. They were highly trained, fastidious, and they stayed on for the entire time. Then this was an interesting move. August 27th, the U.S. Forest Service enlisted the assistance of a man named Bert Sparrows. He was nicknamed the Human Mountain Goat. He had the ability to climb anywhere, go anywhere, never got tired, and he had a weird knack of finding everybody he ever looked for. He said that he would go to a top of a mountain and look below the mountain for magpies and blue jays clustering around locations. And he said, when you found that, you found the body. Well, Bert took off on the 27th and started to climb all the major mountains in the area. Kind of put him on the sidelines there for a second. At the same time, the Forest Service was doing a good job on this one. They also contacted the owner of the most famous search dog in the Pacific Northwest. This dog's name was Arnold von Michelried. He was German Shepherd. He arrived. He had found everyone he had looked for, and he was ready to go. They brought him, and he went down the trail like a gang of riding. He knew exactly what he was doing. The next day, August 28th, heavy rains made search conditions very difficult. 10 fresh mountaineers arrived from Seattle area, and the forest rangers brought in some new technology. Again, folks, this is 1931, about 90 years ago. And these were called new optics. They're now called binoculars. Well, they brought these in and they described it as a huge help. And these things were big at the time. And they were going to put these with some of the searchers that were going on the peaks and look downhill and search everywhere and try to find out what happened to Walter. August 29th through the 31st, 15 to 20 mountaineers kept searching, found nothing. Bert Sparrows, the human mountain goat, he'd climbed 3 or 4 different peaks in the area. Didn't find any birds clustering anywhere. He was dumbfounded. Searchers knew that Walter was tired, didn't feel right, but he should have made it back to camp. And that was puzzling. Well, at about this time, that most famous search dog, Arnold von Michelreid, been searching for several days, also struck out. Nothing. So you have a searcher that always finds people, didn't. You have a dog that always finds people, doesn't. In an area that's a cluster zone now of 3 missing people. The Seattle Mountaineers Club was publicly thanked by Walter's brother for their assistance, along with the assistance of the U.S. Forest Service, the canine, and the human mountain goat. The family knew that a good search had been done, but they believed that they couldn't give up. So on September 9th through the 11th, the family came to Seattle and they formed their own search and rescue team in the same area. Searchers at the time said that they thought they last saw Walter, at least the people he was with, last saw Walter on Commonwealth Ridge. The family believed he made it down the ridge to Gold Creek Valley. Well, they searched that area. And they searched that area for 3 days. They found nothing. On September 11th, all hope was abandoned. As I've told you before, even as a searcher, it's very hard to walk away from a search after you put your heart and soul into looking for somebody that's gone. Especially as a family member, you're walking away knowing they are there and you're going there. And any chance of finding them is now over. And any chance of finding them alive is over. So in your own mind, you have to be certain that they're dead. Now the primary search was given up on August 31st, and that would have been 8 days after he disappeared. If somebody is near water, let's say they have a broken leg and they can reach a creek, they could stay alive 10, 15 days with just water. But you've got to have water. Now, if you have water and food and you have a broken leg, you can stay alive. You can stay alive a long time, as long as the weather doesn't turn really cold. But herein lies the reason why you want to have a personal locator beacon. If you're off trail, the chances of being found are far less than if you're on a trail, unless you have that PLB. Now, there's other things too. One of the reasons I always profess to you that to take lessons with a firearm's like a beacon, especially if you have extra rounds. I've told you many times that if you're a hunter and you disappear, fire off 3 rounds in rapid succession. All hunters know that that's an indicator that somebody needs help. You fire off 3 rounds every 90 minutes, and it's sort of a beacon so people can hone in on where you're at. especially if you don't have a PLB. That's why I've always told people carry at least 25 rounds of extra ammunition. Always. If you don't have a PLB. So that's my advice for today. And those are the 2 missing persons cases. I greatly appreciate you being here. Please make sure you're subscribed. Please. If you like it, ring the bell. Give us a thumbs up. It's right there on your screen. There has been some comments lately, there's 20,000, 30,000 people that watch the show, but there's only maybe 3,000 people that ring the bell. I understand. This is the kindness revolution. We need to be kind to one another. And don't ever generalize. Just because one person treats you wrong doesn't mean the next person's not going to be really nice to you and really polite. Sometimes in today's world, that's hard to remember. Huck's asleep on the floor. She wishes you have a good day. Take care of yourself. Paulides out.